And we're live streaming.
Good. Okay. So we're back in open session. So can I get a motion to receive the information provided from Barristan Law as presented? Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? It's carried. Okay. All right. So the first report for discussion is CAO's report 2001-03 regarding the service delivery review from the County of Dufferin. So this is the same report, Denise, that was on the February 22nd agenda, I think, but do you want to go through it in some more detail tonight? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Mills. So yes, as the mayor mentioned, this is the same report from the 22nd of February that was referred to this special meeting tonight through the recommendation and the approval of council. I'll spend a bit more time, however, going through the background information, in particular, the SDR that was completed by the County of Dufferin and plan or section A, which was specific to lower tier services. And within that service scope, this report will speak primarily and specifically to those areas of called indoor recreation, which in our case is regarding the Centre Dufferin Recreation Center or Cdrc, as well as fire services. So I'll just overview that the county had undertaken this in consultation with all lower tiers. They received significant grant funding to undertake this analysis. And the full report, which is about 89 pages, was provided to council with the attachment. This is the same report that was provided to you in a PowerPoint presentation in December of 2020, with some clarification provided in the final report that was attached to you, but it was more of a wording and clarification of some of the consultative engagements that were undertaken to make sure that there was full capturing of those comments, and in particular with respect to shared services. Additionally, when this council was elected, one of your priorities was to have a strategic priorities document for your council to guide you and direct staff throughout your term. So within the strategic priorities, council had directed staff to undertake a service delivery review, or an SDR. That was originally to be completed in 2020, but due to a number of issues, including the pandemic, it was deferred to 2021. I did outline in this report that we would be providing a grant submission for the second intake of the Municipal Modernization Fund, which includes service delivery reviews. So we did complete that application by the deadline of last week. And we did create a project budget of $75,000, of which $25,000 was included and would match the amount of money that we would need to contribute to a service delivery review as our portion. So we expect to hear about that in April so that a project could be commenced in May or June and meet the completion deadline of the province if you're successful in receiving funding by the end of November. Included in council's strategic priorities, which actually aligns with a service delivery review, was also a specific target of completing under T2, a municipal services review of all services that are delivered by third-party boards, and including a governance review. So in our case, there are 3 service areas, one of which we did not address through the SDR that the county had, and that's libraries, because they're very unique. But 2 areas, as I've mentioned, were completed, and those recommendations included indoor recreation and fire services. So a lot of the work, if not more work, that we would have had to complete with respect to third-party governance of boards was undertaken through the county's initiative with those recommendations. The clerk has outlined in the addendums or the appendices to the report that we provided 2 additional documents just to have the history before council, and those are specific to the center at Cdrc. What I don't have in the report, and I'll just convey verbally, is that prior to a board structure for fire services, the town of Shelburne did in the past have its own fire department. Granted, it was many decades ago, but it did have a fire department. and municipalities that would like to have service through the town of Shelburne were in an arrangement for a fee-for-service agreement with contracts or ways to have their needs met by that existing department of the day. So I will go through, because they've been extracted and italicized, that the governance specific review, as per the county's consultants, had outlined that the options that could be considered for a future model for third-party governance for both indoor recreation as well as fire services, the dissolution of the existing boards and the incorporation of those service areas within the municipal corporate structure of a municipality. And in our case, that would mean the town of Shelburne. So what this would be is the exploration of the dissolution of the boards and the incorporation of those services within the corporate structure of the town of Shelburne, returning the town of Shelburne back to the pre-board exceptional model for fire, but revising the go forward approach as it related to recreation. And the reason staff has requested direction from council, these two service areas are important not only for our own SDR to understand the scope of what the analysis should entail or not. It also has, in the area of recreation, impacts which are significant in the scope of engagement, service review, and recommendations that potentially would emerge to the town of Shelburne as it relates to indoor recreation, because we don't want to spend significant time or resources other than, yes, gaining engagement that could be forwarded to the respective boards through the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, since we don't have the authority without, I guess, participation, which is true, for implementation other than collating all of that information in terms of what our community would like to see. We have brought to council's attention, and it was through the budget process, and I know it was something that we've looked forward to in terms of future costs, and it was identified in the analysis that the consultants for the county undertook, is that the unique structure as it relates to the insurance of these governance models right now has tremendous potential impact to the town of Shelburne. For example, the policies or the insurance of these organizations are within and under the policy for the town of Shelburne, whereby we know that a certain, significant claim in the area of fire had ramifications which were costly to the town of Shelburne with our policy increases in 2021, and which we will continue to pay for many, many years to come. So when there is action or claim against those entities under the policy of the town of Shelburne, the reserves, as they say, will be applied to the town of Shelburne in terms of our policy exposure and potential long-term costs. So we did have an outline in the report just to indicate that budgets as they're constructed for two areas result in, and the agreements, that over 50% or exactly 62% of the Cdrc's budget is funded, and I say budgets, capital as well as operating, by the town of Shelburne. Here is an adjusted schedule with 3 areas being evaluated in terms of that determination. That's households, assessments, and calls for service. And each year, the town of Shelburne's contribution of the overall budget marginally has increased. And as I also addressed, we just did apply for the municipal modernization second intake and hoping to get some funding to help us have a far more comprehensive SDR for a growing community. The other thing I had noted, and this is more specific to recreation, is we have heard from the recommendations of the anti-racism, anti-discrimination task force that parks, recreation, and culture are seen as a significant component of providing equity, fairness, and accessible access to services, and ensuring that those programs and services that are delivered are engaged and reflective of what a community that is evolving expects and desires. Now, we would also, of course, ensure that that consultative process was embedded in our own Parks and Recreation strategy, but certainly there are advantages to delivering what's expected in a structure that you may manage directly. So unless there's more that you would like, having questions, knowing that council has seen this report not only as county councillors, but through the consultative process in the all councils meeting, I'm going to stop there. What we've asked in terms of the recommendation for tonight is that council provide staff with directions specific to these two areas of service to allow us to move forward in whatever direction you advise with respect to our own SDR, which we hope to start in June, as well as the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which we hope to start around the same time, so that we're wrapped up in plenty of time for the 2022 draft budget, as well as future budgets as it relates to expected capital, as well as when we look at a go-forward strategy, when we do the next development charges update, that would have a bearing on those kinds of structures as well, and what would we be including in terms of future project schedules. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay. So staff is looking for some direction. I have drafted a resolution, which I'm happy to put on the floor. But before we get to that, are there any questions for Denise or Carrie on the financial side? No. So I mean, just by way of some brief background, I mean, it's certainly no surprise, or shouldn't be a surprise, that, you know, third-party board governance is something that has kind of been on our radar. It was identified in our strategic plan very early in the term, and then through the county strategic or service delivery review, rather, these two items, at least in the fire and indoor rec context, were picked up and addressed, you know, quite head on, quite frankly. And I think the analysis that the consultants on behalf of the county undertook substantiate at least some of the feelings that I had, and that is that in the case of fire and indoor recreation, there likely is a better way of delivering these services than the way it's being delivered now through the joint boards. Now, that's not to say that the joint boards haven't served their purpose and done so well over the years that they've existed. But, you know, to look at things honestly and through clear eyes, I think, you know, one can conclude, as the consultants have, that those boards have maybe just outlived their useful days, and it's time to look at a different model. In my mind, Shelburne is now large enough of a municipality that I think we're more than capable of managing these services on our own. And along with that, you know, obviously comes some added responsibility, but I think, you know, there also is an opportunity to take more control over our destiny when it comes to the delivery of fire services and indoor rec. So with that, I will put my motion on the floor and then look for a seconder. So the motion reads as follows: be it resolved that council supports in principle the recommendations specific to indoor recreation and fire services from the County of Dufferin's Service Delivery Review Part A, and the dissolution of the boards of management whereby each service area would be directly delivered by the town of Shelburne. And that staff is directed to review and outline the processes to move forward with the dissolution of the two boards, and outline the estimated timelines and estimated costs in a follow-up report. And that council directs staff to incorporate this general direction in the scope of work that would be required within the town's service delivery review, as well as the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as both projects will be completed in the 2021 calendar year. Can I get a seconder for that motion? Councillor Bernardo. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Okay, that's carried. All right, so next item is the CDRC 2021 budgets. Carrie, did you want to speak to that?
Thank you, and through the mayor, this document was on the last council agenda under communications. So we thought we would pull it to discuss it with you, just so that everyone is aware how the town plans on funding the increase in the budget that they've presented. Everyone knows that COVID had and continues to still have negative impacts on culture and recreation as far as operating revenues and expenses are concerned. And we weren't surprised to see this budget before us. And we did discuss it back in the fall when we were deliberating the town's budget. And for that reason, we had included a 19% increase for the Cdrc. So as it stands, it has come in at a 3% increase, which gives us a little bit of wiggle room in our own budget with what we had projected. It still leaves us short, 61,100 out of the additional 93,000 that the arena has requested that we pay with respect to COVID relief. So because the town put 100,000 in the COVID reserve at the end of 2020 to help offset 2021, we have that figure covered, and we can utilize the it was under the COVID safe restart agreement. So we can utilize that funding to cover this deficit. And then in addition to the funding that we did receive in 2020, we've also, as you know, will be receiving, we already did receive $35,000 in January, and then we will also be receiving another $112,225. It is my anticipation that we may have to set some of those funds aside, which we are allowed to do, to help offset 2022. Because as we know, things aren't opening up as quickly as we would hope. And I expect that the CDRC will see a funding deficit in 2021 as well.
In the letter, Carrie, that we received from the admin manager, there was one line that caught my attention. It said, if provincial restrictions remain in place in May, there will be a major impact to this budget. I mean, sitting at mid-March, you know, whether things are fully open in May or not, I guess is still an unknown. But I mean, if I were to bet at this point, I would say it's probably more likely than not that there will still at least be some level of restriction into the month of May. Do we know what those impacts look like?
Personally, I don't. I'm sure the arena would be able to update us on that, though, if I was to reach out to them.
Was that discussed, Councillor Wagner or Deputy Mayor Anderson? What the critical issue with the month of May is? Is that when some other camps start, or? I mean,
yeah,
it's too early, I guess, for summer camps, but
I think you're right. That's where I think maybe a bulk of their revenue comes in is during the summer months. And so if there are further restrictions and they can't run those summer camps, I mean, I think they've recently done some hiring, in fact, to sort of gear up for some of the programming that they have, or at least they're planning to roll out. And so if the restrictions get worse than they are right now, which is some are suggesting we're entering into a third wave, then you can anticipate that that's going to have a significant impact. So I suspect that that's, if I recall, and Councillor Wagner could probably chime in too if she wishes, but I suspect that that's what it had to do with.
So I guess, I raise that more as a cautionary tale than anything else, but it seems to me at least that the budget we're being presented with is using the assumption that things may be back more or less to normal by May. And if they're not, then the numbers we're looking at here could very well be worse than what they're being presented as. Is that your assessment, Carrie?
I believe so. I think when they were doing the budget, they had to pick a month where they thought they would be up and running. And, it was a shot in the dark, probably, because no one really knows. So if that is the case, then sure, they may be looking towards the municipalities to fund more than just what they've asked for.
Denise?
Sorry. So I think it would be an easy undertaking for us to estimate where the revenues potentially will be negated in the absence of returning to normal in May, and look at the revenue lines associated with aquatics and the outdoor pool, and how those service areas, if there's no revenues associated with them, would impact the funding that would be required to offset the losses. I know that with our outdoor recreation, we were very, very conservative in expecting that park rentals would be non-existent in 2021. For reasons. We also know that the experience in a lot of other municipalities, that a lot of user groups and the organizations are struggling as well with registration and are seeking and asking for waiving of fees or reductions to allow them to be responsive to some of the constraints and pressures that they're facing. So significant additional impacts on revenue projections, even in September, potentially, as you get back any sort of normalcy in terms of your ability to operate. So the $150,000 that was projected, of which about 93 is being attributed to the town of Shelburne, as you've said, Mayor Mills, it could escalate post May's assessment into September, depending on what that revenue capacity is with any reduction in ability to deliver services.
Yeah, and that's what my concern is, that we're estimating that an additional $150,000 is going to be needed this year, to offset COVID related expenses or lost revenues, but that seems to be on the assumption that things will be back to normal by May. And none of us have a crystal ball, obviously, but I think it might be overly optimistic to assume that revenue streams will be back to normal this summer. So, yeah, I guess the one fortunate thing is, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my time on the board, I think the bulk of revenues were through the winter season through ice rentals. And these numbers certainly capture that. But the revenue for aquatics and day camps and everything else are not insignificant. So, okay. All right. So, do you need anything formal from us, Carrie? I mean, we've already approved our budget, so yeah. Okay. Okay. Can I get a motion then to receive the 2021 Cdrc budget as presented? Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? It's carried. Okay. All right, and the next up is a report from Jennifer regarding the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. You're going to walk us through a proposed selection process for those committee members.
Yes, thank you, through your worship. I'll just review the process for interviews. So in total, 25 applications were received. We're now down to 23 applications, 2 have withdrawn. Staff are recommending that a special closed session meeting be called for March 25th to perform the interviews. Personal information provided within the applications and in the interview process are confidential and protected under the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. And so, as noted on page 2, the process for review of the applications is as follows. All of council will form the interview panel. Council members will receive copies of the applications tomorrow morning, the morning of March 16th. Council members will shortlist the applications to their top 12 preferences within the next 5 days. And hopefully you can send me your 12 preferred candidates by Sunday, March 21st at 4 p.m. Preferred candidates will be contacted to confirm their interview time. Interviews will be 10 minutes in length. Interview questions will be provided to council with a scoring mechanism. Review of the scored interviews will take place in closed session. Once council has determined the preferred committee members, council will rise from closed session and appoint the successful committee and council members. And just as a friendly reminder, there are 7 community members to be appointed and 2 council members. That's just a quick overview of the process, and the recommendation provided to council was that council approves the interview process as noted in the report and directs staff to call a special closed session council meeting to be held March 25th to hold candidate interviews for selection of diversity, equity, and inclusion committee members. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Any questions or discussions on that? So we'll get the list of applicants tomorrow. Is there going to be some sort of like objective scoring sheet?
I can send you, I don't have a scoring sheet for review of the applications, but I can send you a copy of the questions that have been prepared if you're wanting to review that, but there is no scoring mechanism for review of the applications.
Okay, because I'm just wondering, I mean, if all of us have differing short lists of 12, how do we settle on who the 12 actually are without some kind of scoring sheet?
Go from 1 to 12. Top to bottom. Add them up.
Yeah, well, that was my question as well. Assuming that we're not going to agree on all 12, how is that resolved? Because it seems like it's submitted on Sunday by deadline, and then the preferred candidates are contacted. And so without any sort of scoring, and if there is disagreement, then how are you making a decision as to who's going to be contacted?
My question is, why does all of council have to shortlist? I'd rather, I don't get it. That's where we're going to have the issue with all different scoring or choosing of the people coming in. Does it have to be all of council that shortlist? Can it be not a smaller group that shortlisted and then all of council of necessary interview the shortlisted and have only those resumes come to us rather than all of the resumes come to us?
I think the rationale was to have as broad a perspective as possible in that shortlisting process. You know, if anything, I would maybe suggest we have a smaller group do the final interviews. But you know, I think we're trying to have as much feedback from all 7 of us as possible. You know, in paring down that initial group, and I do think it's quite workable. But the only, I guess, suggestion I would make is that each candidate would have to be given some sort of score using it like an objective scorecard. And then basically what happens is, you know, we take the aggregate scores of the top 12 when you look at how all 7 of us have scored them. So you add up the scores from all 7 council members for each of the 23 applicants, and the 12 with the highest scores are the ones that move on. That seems to me to be the easiest, fairest way to do it. Denise? Can't find
Sorry, I
the
apologize. I'm running 3 screens and 2 mouses. And I always get the wrong mouse. That is something we can certainly provide to you so that you'll have criteria and you'll put a score against each criteria or collectively, so that when they're all pooled, there's points associated with the top 12 candidates, which justifies how they were determined.
Yes, that can be created and sent out as well.
Okay, so will that come tomorrow morning with or is that going to be delayed because that now has to be created?
You'll get it by noon.
By noon? Okay, all right. And to the mayor's point about, and maybe even Councilor Bonato, about once it is narrowed down, how many people need to be interviewing? I think having, I'm hoping that this wasn't going to be the case, that all of council interview. I think that's a bit much. Certainly at the county level, that wasn't the case. And so I would certainly agree with maybe narrowing that scope down. And then lastly, at what point, when it comes to the two council members that are to be part of this committee, at what time is that going to be resolved?
And so in my report, it notes that the selection of the council members will also be on the evening of the 25th.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you.
So that eliminates the possibility of a smaller group, because if we're selecting council members, it's a discussion between all of us.
No, not necessarily. I mean, if I mean, okay, I don't even, whatever. It's fine. It's fine.
Is there anybody you can, oh, sorry, Denise?
I just wanted to explain that the reason all of council was also asked to be part of the overall interview team was that night you as council are appointing the selected members as the appointed representatives, and you're announcing that. So for order for that decision to be valid that night, as opposed to recommending to a future council meeting, the slate that you have narrowed it down to, or the 7, that's why it also is fundamentally beneficial to have a full council meeting that night. If not, what would happen is the formal appointment of the smaller group would go to the next council meeting in April for council to ratify, unless you call another special council meeting to ratify that.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about this before now, but I guess in terms of consistency, like when we do other board appointments, committee appointments at the beginning of the term, it's all of council that's in on that discussion.
Yes.
So, Councillor Wagner, I saw your hand, and then Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that I was just going to sort of make that point, is that when we do choose the members of the other committees, it's all of council. So I guess my question would be, or whatnot, that's a requirement, I believe, is that in order to appoint people, all council must agree. I might be wrong though, I don't know, but that's just what I
yeah, we would need a majority of council to ratify any appointments. So I mean, either all of us, you know, serve on the interview committee and we settle it that night, or as Denise said, we would have some smaller committee who would do interviews, then make a recommendation to a future council meeting, and then we'd have a discussion to ratify it then. That would just delay it. But
right.
You know, I think upon reflection, I think the approach that is being suggested is the right approach, and that all of council be involved. As much as it may seem drawn out, upon reflection, I think is the best case scenario. And for the simple fact that that will eliminate any concern or issues or feeling left out or feeling whatever people may feel by not being a part of the entire process. So at least this way, once a decision is made, I wouldn't expect to hear anybody say that, you know, they didn't necessarily agree with the decision that was being made. So, so yeah, I think that is best that we keep it the way that it is, in my view.
Jennifer?
I was just going to say that I wanted to provide a fair and equitable approach in order for all council to have the opportunity to participate, to ensure that all of council had the opportunity to do so.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Is everybody good for the 25th? Yeah, okay. All right, so we have a motion, be it resolved, the council receives report LS 2021-05 from the clerk for information, and the council approves the interview process as noted in the report and directs staff to call a special closed session council meeting to be held March 25th, 2021, to hold a candidate interview, to hold candidate interviews for selection of diversity, equity, and inclusion committee members. Get a mover and seconder. Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Get a mover and seconder for the confirming bylaw. Otto and Paul. All in favor? Carried. And a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Bernardo, second by Councillor Hall. All in favor? Carried. All right.
Jennifer, can I speak to you minutes after?